Angel Batista didn't just know Dexter's secret, he helped him keep it. He saw the signs, the inconsistencies, the moments that didn't add up. He knew Dexter wasn't just another forensic analyst. And yet not only did he stay silent, but he may have played a role in making sure Dexter was never caught. He watched Dexter kill Oliver Saxon in cold blood. A clean, efficient execution, not self-defense. Any seasoned cop would have seen it. Batista did too. But instead of questioning it, he let Dexter walk free. No report, no investigation, just silence. And then, the phone call. The moment in the Dexter finale that everyone overlooked. Batista answers. His face shifts from confusion to shock. And he says one word, Dexter? Most assumed it was the Coast Guard informing him of Dexter's death. But that doesn't add up. Why would the Coast Guard call Batista? Dexter had already quit Miami Metro. He wasn't on the force anymore. Batista had no official reason to be notified, unless that call wasn't from the Coast Guard at all. What if it was Dexter? What if, in his final act before disappearing, he confessed? It sounds insane. But when you break it down, the evidence tells a different story. Angel Batista wasn't just a good cop. He was one of the most respected detectives at Miami Metro. He had spent years solving cases, identifying killers, and putting criminals behind bars. He knew what to look for, how to spot deception, how to tell when something wasn't right. So when he watched the security footage of Dexter killing Oliver Saxon, he must have known. Because let's be honest, that wasn't self-defense. That was an execution. A clean, efficient, and calculated kill. Dexter didn't hesitate. He didn't panic, didn't act out of fear, and didn't even try to de-escalate the situation. He sat in that holding cell with Saxon, knowing exactly what was going to happen next. He provoked Saxon, waited for him to make a move, and the moment he did, Dexter struck back. One precise stab, straight to the carotid artery. A single, controlled motion. The kind of lethal precision that no ordinary forensic tech should have. And Batista saw everything. In that moment, Batista had a choice. He could have opened an internal investigation. He could have questioned how a blood spatter analyst with no combat training managed to take down a man so effortlessly. He could have asked why Dexter always seemed to be at the center of suspicious deaths. But instead, he chose silence. No report, no interrogation, no follow-up, nothing. And it wasn't just Batista. Detective Quinn was there too. He saw the exact same footage. He watched Dexter take down Saxon with the kind of confidence that no lab geek should have. And yet, when it came time to decide what to do next, both men agreed to let it slide. They called it self-defense. They let Dexter walk free. But why? Because they didn't want to ask the real question. Who exactly was Dexter Morgan? Because if they admitted that this was an execution, that meant acknowledging something far more dangerous, that Dexter had done this before. And once you start down that path, there's no turning back. Let's not forget, Batista had spent years working alongside Dexter. He had seen him in high-stress situations. He had watched him work crime scenes, analyze evidence, and go toe-to-toe with some of Miami's most dangerous criminals. But he had never seen him act like this before. This wasn't a man caught in a desperate situation. This was a man in control, and that should have been a red flag. Because if Dexter was capable of this, what else was he capable of? Maybe Batista looked at that footage and realized something terrifying. That Laguerta was right all along, that Dokes really was framed, that the Bay Harbor Butcher had been right in front of them this entire time. And if that was the case, then Batista had a second choice to make. He could turn Dexter in, or he could let him walk free. We know which one he chose, but why? Did he really believe Dexter had acted in self-defense? Or did he already know the truth and decide that Miami was better off letting Dexter do what the system couldn't? Maybe he saw what Laguerta refused to see, that as much as they wanted to believe in justice, the law had failed too many times, that Dexter was only taking out the people that the system let slip through the cracks. If Batista had confronted Dexter, what would that have accomplished? If he had turned him in, what would have happened? Would he have been able to convict him without proof? And if Dexter really was out there cleaning up Miami's worst criminals, was that really such a bad thing? Maybe Batista decided that looking the other way was the best option. Maybe, in that moment, he rationalized that letting Dexter go was better than trying and failing to stop him. Either way, one thing was clear. By not stopping Dexter that day, Batista became part of the cover-up. Whether he admitted it to himself or not, he had made a choice. And once you cover up one murder, it gets harder and harder to look the other way, which is exactly what he did until the phone call. Batista had already looked the other way once, but when that phone rang, there was no more denying it. The truth was finally catching up to him. A single word, Dexter, The disbelief in his voice, the look of pure shock on his face. It wasn't grief, it wasn't confusion, it was realization. Because in that moment, Batista finally knew for sure. And maybe, deep down, he had always known. But now, there was no turning back. The official story was that the Coast Guard had found wreckage from Dexter's boat, assumed he had drowned, and called Batista to inform him. But why? Why would the Coast Guard notify Batista when Dexter wasn't even on the force anymore? He had resigned. He had cut ties. There was no logical reason for them to contact Batista first, unless the call wasn't from the Coast Guard at all. What if that call was from Dexter himself? What if, in a final moment of reckoning, he confessed? For years, he had hidden in plain sight, pretending to be just another forensic analyst, just another guy doing his job. But he had nothing left now. Deborah was gone. His life in Miami was over. There was no reason to keep up the lie anymore. And Batista, the man who had trusted him for so long, was the last loose end. Picture it. Batista picks up the phone. The voice on the other end is unmistakable. Angel, it was me. Lagerta was right. Dokes was innocent. I'm the Bay Harbor butcher. Batista wouldn't know how to respond. His mind would be racing, replaying every moment, every clue, every doubt he had ignored. The security footage of Dexter killing Saxon, the way Lagerta had been so certain, the way Dexter had always been just a little too close to every major case, the way he had dismissed it all, convinced that it was impossible. But now there was no more room for denial. And what do you do when you realize you've been protecting a monster? That phone call wasn't just a confession, it was a reckoning. It was Dexter forcing Batista to face the truth, to carry the weight of knowing that he had let the real Bay Harbor butcher slip through his fingers for years. And then, just as quickly as it started, the call was over. Dexter was gone, and Batista? He was left holding the truth, with nowhere to put it. Years later, in Dexter, New Blood, Batista receives an unexpected call from Angela Bishop. She tells him about Jim Lindsay, a man she now believes is actually Dexter Morgan. She also brings up the Bay Harbor butcher case, referencing a conversation she once had with Lagerta. Batista's reaction isn't just shock, it's recognition, as if a long-buried doubt is finally resurfacing. If he had truly believed Dexter was dead, why does this call hit him so hard? Is it disbelief? Or confirmation of something he had quietly suspected all along? For years, Batista had moved on, not necessarily from guilt, but from the case itself. As far as he knew, Dexter's story had ended, or at least that's what he told himself. But now, a sheriff from a town he's never heard of is reopening a door he thought was closed. She isn't just asking about a missing person, she's linking Dexter to another murder. And in that moment, Batista sees it all clearly. The doubts he once ignored, the inconsistencies he dismissed, the quiet voice in his head that had always whispered, "What if?" Now, he can't ignore it anymore. The truth is right in front of him, and for the first time, he has to decide. Does he finally act on it? Was he going to face the truth? Was he finally going to do what he should have done years ago? Or was he going to let it go again, convince himself that this wasn't his fight? He had a chance to right a wrong, to reopen the investigation, to confirm what Lagerta had been trying to prove all along. But there was something else too, something no one was considering. Batista wasn't just heading to Iron Lake to confirm Dexter's identity, he was walking straight into a reckoning, a moment that would force him to make a choice. Bring Dexter to justice or perhaps do something even more unexpected. He had already let Dexter walk once before, so who's to say he wouldn't do it again? He knew Dexter was a killer, but he also knew how often the system failed. He had seen criminals slip through legal loopholes, watched them escape justice because of technicalities or corruption. And Dexter? He had done what the law couldn't. If Batista had spent years suppressing the truth, was it because he was afraid of what it meant? Or was it because, deep down, he had never wanted to stop Dexter in the first place? Angela didn't just call Batista to inform him. She was reaching out for validation. She had pieces of the puzzle, but she needed someone to confirm what she already suspected. Batista agreed to help. But why? Why, after all these years, did this call suddenly force him to act? Maybe it wasn't just about the case. Maybe it was about unfinished business. Batista had spent his entire career watching the justice system fail. He had seen criminals walk free on technicalities, victims denied justice because of broken bureaucracy, and good cops punished for trying to do the right thing. He had ignored Lagerta when she tried to expose Dexter. He had stood by when Dexter murdered Oliver Saxon in cold blood. And for years, he had lived with an unspoken truth. Miami had been safer with Dexter in the shadows. He may never have admitted it out loud, but deep down, he knew. But now, Dexter was back. At least that's what Angela Bishop suspected. And suddenly, Batista was forced to make a decision. Was he heading to Iron Lake to confirm what he had long feared and finally put an end to it? Or was there another reason? One he wasn't ready to admit? Was he going not to bring Dexter to justice, but to make sure he disappeared for good, on his own terms? Batista had been a good cop, but he had seen too much to believe in clean justice. He had watched good people die trying to do the right thing. Maybe that guilt had been eating away at him for years, pushing him toward Iron Lake. Or maybe, before he even got in the car, he had already made up his mind. But here's the thing, Batista never got the chance. By the time he was on his way, Dexter was bleeding out from a gunshot wound delivered by his own son, Harrison. That was the last we saw. The screen faded to black. No confirmation of what happened next. No scene of Batista arriving. Just an open-ended conclusion. No closure. No justice. Just the unknown. But what if Batista got there in time? What if, instead of finding a lifeless body, he found Dexter still breathing, barely hanging on? What would he have done then? Would he have called it in, let the law finally take over? Or would he have done something entirely different? Because Batista wasn't just another cop. He had seen the law fail too many times. He had watched Laguerta die for the truth, only for that truth to be buried. He had already let Dexter walk free once after killing Saxon, and if he had done it before, who's to say he wouldn't do it again? Standing there, looking at Dexter on the brink of death, Batista wouldn't have just seen a criminal. He would have seen a man who had done what the system couldn't. A man who had taken down murderers and predators that the law had let roam free. Maybe, in that moment, Batista realized that justice wasn't black and white. Maybe he understood that Dexter wasn't just another killer. He was something else entirely. And if that's true, then the real question isn't whether Batista knew the truth. It's whether he made a choice, one last time, to let Dexter win. Because what if Batista didn't let him die? What if, instead of watching the life drain from Dexter's eyes, he saved him, helped him disappear for good? What if right now, somewhere out there, Dexter is still alive? If that's the case, then the question isn't just whether Batista knew. It's whether Batista made sure the world would never see Dexter Morgan again. So now, let's lay it all out. Batista wasn't just another detective who missed the signs. He was at the center of it all. He saw Dexter execute Oliver Saxon and let him walk. He ignored Laguerta when she got too close to the truth. And when that final phone call came, he wasn't just shocked. He was confronted with something he could no longer deny. For years, Batista lived with the weight of those choices. He moved on, buried his suspicions, convinced himself that whatever truth he ignored had died with Dexter in the storm. But then, years later, Angela Bishop pulled him right back in. She reopened a door he had slammed shut, forcing him to question everything he had once accepted. By the time Batista was on his way to Iron Lake, Dexter had already been shot. The screen faded to black before we could see what happened next. But what if Batista got there in time? What if, instead of justice, he saw an opportunity? He had already let Dexter walk once before. He had spent years questioning whether justice always did the right thing. What if, in that moment, he made the same decision again? What if, instead of letting Dexter die, he helped him escape? The truth is, Batista's role in this story isn't as clear-cut as it seems. He wasn't just another detective in Dexter's life. He was one of the few people with the power to stop him. And yet he never did. Whether it was guilt, self-preservation, or something else entirely, Batista had his reasons for staying silent. So the real question isn't whether Batista knew Dexter's secret. It's whether he let Dexter win, one last time. Drop your theories in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next one.